I would like to begin by giving a little background about our speaker. Our special guest tonight is Sir Andreas Widmer. He is an interpreter, a professor, an author, and he was also a former Swiss Guard. Andreas has extensive experience as a business executive. As an entrepreneur, he co-founded the Seven Fund, which promotes novel solutions to poverty, and he has helped bring over 100 technology products to market. He is also an associate professor of practice and entrepreneurship at the Catholic University of America's Bush School of Business. He loves to teach and mentor students to find their true calling. Andreas is also the author of 2 books that we have here tonight, The Art of Principled Entrepreneurship, and also The Pope and the CEO. The latter book, The Pope and the CEO, will be the topic of discussion for tonight because it lays out the beautiful lessons Andreas learned from Pope St. John Paul II while serving as a Swiss Guard. We will also discuss how Sir Andreas Widmer received the special distinction of being awarded the Pontifical Equestrian Order of St. Sylvester, Pope and Martyr. Yes, Sir Andreas Widmer is a knight. We are also joined tonight by Andreas' wife, Lady Michelle, who wrote a beautifully illustrated children's book about Andreas' experience as a Swiss Guard. We will try to end early tonight so that we will have plenty of time for them to sign their books. This is Michelle's book. Now I will join Sir Andreas Widmer for a conversation. Our theme tonight is Sanctifying Your Work, Finding God in Your Daily Labor. Please welcome Sir Andreas Widmer.
Thank you.
First, I want to thank you so much for coming to St. Patrick's. We are blessed to have you here.
Thank you.
Tonight we will go through some of the chapters of one of your books, The Pope and the CEO. But first I want to ask a question that many here are probably most curious about. So I'd like to first start with your life as a Swiss Guard and lessons you learned from that experience. How does someone from a small town in Switzerland become a Swiss Guard? Is that something that all Swiss men aspire to?
No, I can say, does this work at all? Yeah. I can say that not all Swiss men aspire to it because not all Swiss men are Catholic. Most people don't know, but Switzerland is not a primarily Catholic country. It's a Protestant country because Calvin, of course, did the Reformation in Geneva. Calvin's place was in Geneva, and Zwingli, another reformer, was in Zurich, and so most of Switzerland is not Catholic anymore, but I'm coming from the minority of central Switzerland, places like Lucerne, the canton of Lucerne, which is where I'm from. We are Catholic, and in there is there's an awareness and an old history of being mercenaries, which the Swiss Guards are, that actually predate the Reformation. So our military corps in the Vatican, the Swiss Guards, are older than the Reformation, so we have been in service since 1506. So it has a long history, and it predates the division in Switzerland.
So did you need to speak Italian, or how did that?
So you need to speak 2 languages, but that's very easy in Switzerland because you can't turn without having to speak another language. And so growing up I spoke German, and then I learned French. I did my military service in Switzerland in French, in the French part. And then you basically, for the Swiss Guards, you apply. Switzerland has a militia, meaning everybody serves in the military. And then the Swiss Guards just watch. They're not affiliated with the Swiss government or the Swiss military, but all your military records are public. And so they just watch what they're seeing, and then if they like you, they say, hey, how about you join us? And that's what happened to me, is that some of the other young guys that I knew growing up, or that I met, basically said that, what do you think if you would become a bodyguard? So I was prolific. I was very good in the military because I have 4 older brothers, so I know how to fight. And
just survival.
And I'm as the youngest, I have endurance, I have grit, and the military love that. And and so a guy said to me, how would you like to be a bodyguard? And I'm like, that is the coolest thing you could possibly do. And so I applied, and then I found out that I would protect the Pope, And I was at the time not very Catholic. The Catholic faith was my parents' faith, right? I was baptized into a cradle Catholic, but it wasn't mine. You know what I mean? When you're a teenager, the faith is not yours. But I didn't have anything against the Pope. I'm like, well, whatever. As long as you pay me and I can be a bodyguard, I'll do it. And so I entered the Swiss Guards when I was 20 years old.
Fantastic. So the other thing I was going to ask is, what was it like to work for Pope St. John Paul II? Did you recognize right away that you were working for a saint?
No, I didn't have the word saint in my mind or in my vocabulary. It's I just want to dwell on this a little bit. It's a really good thing that a Swiss Guard, and still today, most of the Swiss Guards entered their service not with faith in mind, but with being a bodyguard in mind. Because Switzerland is, of course, not very well evangelized, and the faith there is not as strong, I believe, as in the United States. And so you get a lot of these young kids that would otherwise just go on their way or so, but because I was not well catechized, and I go there, and then you meet somebody like John Paul II. I remember I met him the first time. So you go in, this is a foreign legion. Have you ever heard of the French Foreign Legion or something like that? Which is, you sign with blood, right? So we don't sign with blood, but because Switzerland is not Catholic, when I go serve the Pope, I'm serving a foreign head of state. And therefore, I have to give up my citizenship. Like, you have to renounce being Swiss during that time that you're there, which means they take your passport. And that's the part where it becomes a foreign legion. That if you don't have a passport, you can't go anywhere. I mean, I had a passport, but it was a Vatican passport. Right. So the door closes behind you, you're in there, and you're not coming out for 2 years. That's where you are. Then they started training, and very quickly I found out this is actually, I just wanted to be cool. I didn't want to be working that hard or working out that hard or be under such discipline. And so very quickly I'm like, okay, I got to tap out of this, but then I realized I can't tap out of this. And I was very discouraged about that. And I felt that this work was just not made for me. I have to say, I was also, I learned this later. I have ADD and dyslexia, which is, debilitating if you are in school. Me and school don't go along so well. It's funny that I'm a professor today. But I didn't succeed in anything when I was in Switzerland. That's part of why I so much focused on the military. And coming into the Swiss Guards and actually finding out that I made a mistake was devastating to me. And then on top of it, they put me in service for one of my first things I had to do on an evening that I wasn't supposed to work. And just they're like, just, you're the newbie, you do this. And and I try to talk back and they'll just cut you out. Like, you know how this can go in the military, it's not pleasant. And I was in this little room, which people always think that the people the closer, like once the Pope is stationary, the people closest to the Pope are the youngest ones, and the people on the outside circles are the most senior ones, because by the time you get that close, it's a bit too late, right? So you do the experienced people on the outer rings, and then the less. And so I was all the way in the ring, as a matter of fact, right in front of his apartment, and was in a little room. It was not much bigger than this. And in there, you basically have a desk. You could, you're there for 8 o'clock, from 8 o'clock in the evening to 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're not allowed to sleep. And there's like rounds coming around. And I sit there. There was like this one little lamp that gave me a little bit of light that I could read something. Other than that, you can stand up and walk around. But there's 2 huge doors, one going into the Pope's apartment and one going out into the loggia, the loggias, the Bernini's loggias. This is now on the 3rd floor of the Apostolic Palace. And so I'm in this little room, and I was just so depressed. And I call this the perfect emotional storm, that I was sitting there just stewing, and mostly not at them, but at me, saying, I don't amount to anything. So again, I screwed up again, right? I'm 20 years old, and everything I've done so far just came to nothing, right? And the latest now I do this, and then the coup de grace was, and that day, it was actually the 24th of December. Where I come from, you celebrate Christmas on the 24th, not on the 25th. Like the big deal is the 24th.
The European.
And they're making me work that night, and they're all having a party, and I'm there, and I'm saying, so these people, this is just not going to work. And I tell you, I cried my eyes out because you're alone, and nobody's coming. You're alone up there in this little room. And I was just, it was one of these evenings I never forget. Just you know it yourself. When you accuse yourself better than your worst enemy because you know, right? And I was just, and then the radio goes off, and the commander says, "Hey, Widmer, the Pope is going to leave his apartment. He's using your exit. Let him out." I'm like, what? All I could do is just, you're trained, it's not difficult what to do, and all I could do is just do what I was told and then stand in attention, which is what I was told. I'll give you a secret, don't tell the Pope if you ever meet him. But so we watch him all the time. We are responsible for his bodily security, so we watch him even in his apartment all the time, where he is and what he's doing. And then if he approaches a door, as he approaches, we turn the key quietly and move back. And the Pope never finds a closed door. But the truth is, he's always locked in, right? And so all I have to do is turn the key, pull the key out, stand back and stand in attention, and then this door opens up. And this yellow warm light comes into my little room there, and in the door frame stands John Paul II. And he was a stout little guy. I mean, I'm 6'9", I call him little. He wasn't little, but he was a stout, Polish guy. He's actually stocky,
So he was athletic, right? Or
He was athletic.
How old was he at that time?
It was at 89, so 26? Yeah, 66 or 65
okay.
maybe. When I met him, he was still hiking, skiing, swimming. He was very fit still. There was none of his tremor yet or anything. And it wasn't 89, it was 86. So he was just, he became the Pope at 85. It's actually my age. and that was 10 years later. So 69 he might have been. So whatever. He was still young and fit, and he stands in this doorway, and and the light comes in. I just remember how the light comes behind him into my dark little room, and he had this habit that when he was interested in something, he would like tilt his head, and so he tilts his head. He sees me, tilts his head, and says, "Hey, you're new. What's your name? I've never met you before." And I'm like, I think I gave him my ID number, and he starts to reach his hand out to me and walk towards me. The protocol is if he talks to me, I can respond. If he reaches out, I don't make contact, but if he reaches his hand out, wants to shake my hand, I'll shake his hand.
Yeah.
So our hands meet, and then he looks up and our eyes meet. And he had these beautiful grayish eyes, and I could see in a moment that can you imagine how I looked like? By then it was 11 o'clock, and I'd just been crying for 3 hours. I knew, in an instant he looked at me, I could tell how he took the information in, and he said, "Of course, this must be your first Christmas away from home, isn't it?" That was the wrong thing to say to me. So I'm holding his hand. I'm starting to I'm starting to cry. My tears come down, and I'm like crying. And he pulled me in and put his arm around me and said, "Andreas, I thank you for the sacrifice you're making here. You will see, you and I will work well together. I look forward to working with you, and I appreciate your sacrifice." And then he turns to me and he says, "I tell you what, I'm going to go and celebrate Mass right now, and I'm going to offer it up for you." And then he turned around and he walked away. Well, I want to dwell on it.
Yeah.
I want to just dwell on this now in retrospect. You know, Pope Benedict always says that your memories are often enlightened by the Holy Spirit. That the Holy Spirit puts additional meaning. It's like what the Gospels are. After, you do not understand now, but later you will. And I'm seeing that at the time I was in a sense a valid Catholic because I received the sacrament of baptism and confirmation and the Eucharist, but I wasn't on fire with Jesus' love. And if this man would have told me, listen, Andreas, which is the classic male thing to do, is to say, listen, here's what you need to do. You need to pray more, and this is the rosary, and you gotta go and go do this. Not once did this man ever tell me what to do. What he does tell you is what he will do for you. And what he did is to love me first. Once he loved me first, when he walked away, I'm like, now there's a guy, he cares about me, to him I matter, and he's the boss. So he's saying he loves working with me and we're going to be fine. That's a good guy. From then on, whenever I saw him, we picked up the conversation where he left it off. I mean, the way he paid attention. And I'm like, look, it looks cool out here to be a Swiss Guard. We are a fly on the... How many Secret Service people you live in D.C., you don't know the Secret Service people. You're supposed to blend in the background, right? That's what we really are. Yes, we have the uniform to do some official stuff, but the usual Swiss Guard is way in the background, and the less you see of us, the better. We're supposed to just be invisible, and he knows your name, and he knows the last time he talked to you, and he knows what your worries and your trouble are, to the point that eventually I said, whatever this man has, that's what I want. Because I was a searcher. I was a 20-year-old tough kid who was searching, for happiness. And he had this happiness, and I said, whatever this guy has, that's what I want.
It sounds like he was a saint, and he showed you Jesus' way by loving you first. That's what Jesus does. Jesus loves us first. So I would like to talk a little bit about the book, because it draws so much from the lessons you learned from Pope John Paul II. I started reading The Pope and the CEO, and my husband who's here right now.
Yeah.
After every
I just met him.
After every chapter, I'm like, you have to read this. You have to read this, and I want to kind of do a study, and maybe even here at St. Patrick's, there's questions at the back of each chapter that are worth pursuing individually, but also maybe in a group setting. So I want to just go to a couple chapters. And the first one I thought of is chapter 2, which is entitled Know God and the Power of Prayer. The beginning of that chapter, you quote from St. John Paul II, prayer helps us to discover the loving face of God. He never abandons his people, but guarantees that notwithstanding trials and sufferings, good triumphs in the end. And I just want to ask you, how did the idea for that chapter come about? And you were obviously in the midst of somebody who's a prayer warrior extraordinaire. His example just demonstrated itself.
So when I showed him that, in a sense, I wanted to be like him, that he's my hero, I admired him, and I looked up to him. He was my idol. He would not accept it. He would always say, what you're looking for is not me, you're looking for Jesus Christ. He would point to the cross and say, that's who you're looking for, and what you like in me, that's him. I have him, and here's the trick. You can have him. You actually have him. You need to rediscover Christ in your life. I'm like, yeah, that's a tall order for a guy like me. And he took out his rosary and gave it to me and said, Andreas, this is my favorite prayer. Honestly, I just put it away. The first time he gave it to me, see, again, there what he said is my favorite prayer. Like, I want to be like him. He's like, he didn't tell me to pray it. This is my favorite prayer. And he gives it to me, and I put it away, and his secretary saw that. So they go away, and then the Pope goes whatever, and the secretary's walking back, and he goes by me and says, so what did you do? And I'm like, hey, it's somewhere in here. And he says, do you know how to pray? And I'm like, look, no, the rosary is something my grandmother prays. I'm a tough guy, 20 years old. I'm a bodyguard. I'm not going to do that. And he says, look, first of all, you're not as tough as you look. And second of all you do really is stand around all day. And you won't lose anything by trying it. And if you feel it makes me look weak, then put one hand into your pocket and then pray the rosary in there, right? And this man taught me how to pray the rosary, and I started, and because I wanted to be like John Paul, I started to pray, and I had and what ended up happening is that I had a profound spiritual experience through the rosary. And I can just tell everybody here, and I know we have the Marian Sodality, the Legion of Mary here, that this is where to go. I have ADD, so Michelle knows, I'm like a cat with a laser pointer. I can't keep my thoughts on the same thing for any amount of time. But what this prayer, and Mary particularly, gives you is this peace and calm. The rosary is like the waves at the beach, and the beach calms you down. And these waves come in, and I recommend this prayer for anybody, and especially now in Lent, to just give it a chance. Like, start with a decade. Don't make it a marathon or an achievement, but make it like your rhythm. And that's how I was taught how to do it, and it had a profound impact on me. Later on, when I started to go to school, I came to America and go to school and then started to work in these startups and everything. Then this quiet becomes rarer, and the reason why I started this chapter is because one of the things I wanted to show is that there is the contemplative life, and there's a lot of good things you can do, but that does not mean that if you have a career or you're in school and there's finals coming up and you have a lot of things to do, that does not mean you can't, even through this itself, find the contemplative life. So we are, St. Francis de Sales is one of my favorite saints, and he talks about our holiness in the common life, like in the lay life. And I think that's something that John Paul was speaking to us through his writings on the theology of the body, and we can go deeper into this. But what I wanted to, the reason why I wrote this and why it's in there, because prayer is not only what I told you about the rosary, although that's a beautiful thing, but prayer is also what you do all day long, and that is just as important and valuable as contemplative prayer.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned in the chapter was working as a CEO. You related to the interdependence of all those in the company, but also those who are on the receiving end of the services or business. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
How should I put this? Yeah, you see what we want to do in business. My favorite sentence in business is, "How may I help you?" Don't you miss that? You go into a store and somebody says, "How may I help you?" and they mean it.
Yes.
Right? That's what business is. And work is to turn to the other and say, "How may I help you?" Is a deeply Christian thing to do. What can I do to create value for you? How would you like your eggs cooked? That's a deeply Christian intuition, to actually please this other person. And this pleasing of the other person, John Paul would call that is love. Like, you're called to love each other. It's so funny. Like, John Paul talked about this. It's sort of weird. It's culturally strange to say, "Well, I love you," right? And we just met, we had a couple of words with each other, and I come in and say, "Oh, I love you." It cheapens the word in a sense, because I use this for my wife, I use this for my son. I say, "I love you," and then I love pretzels. It's just not a good, the word has been used up. So he says, look, but the church very clearly teaches what love is. And the foundation of love is most beautifully explained in the expression of how Italians say, "I love you," to somebody like we can say it to each other. And they wouldn't say, "Ti amo," "I love you." They would say that for romantic love, familial love. If they just meet each other like this, and especially if they would work with each other, the term is "ti voglio bene." Ti voglio bene. I want your good. That's love. Ti voglio bene. Isn't that beautiful?
It's beautiful.
Got to hand it to the Italians.
Yeah.
Ti voglio bene. I want your good. And John Paul would react and say, well, what's the good that you want from me? You know how we all have trouble of saying, you know, the public, you're not supposed to wear your religion on your sleeves, and you can't go to people say, you know, have you met Jesus yet? Well, maybe that's true. But if I say, I want your good, what's the highest good I can wish upon you? What is it? Heaven. Do you have to believe for that, or do I have to believe for that, for having that, for wishing that on you? I do.
That's right.
And the way that, in saying, ti voglio bene, I want your good, has something to do with what I'm doing to or with or about you. We're getting this wrong. John Paul said, ti voglio bene to me, and went to pray for me. When we're in work, we need to look around and do this with whoever you live with or work with or whoever you have the contact with. And from the heart, look at this person and say, I want your good. And then ask yourself, what can I do to manifest the good I want for this person? So if you're a CEO, if you're the head of the bakery, if you're the head of the school, the teacher, what good do you wish upon the students or on the employees or the customers, and how can you show it? If you don't mean to wish to send them to hell, why would you ever give them a product that would addict them or lead them astray or give them an impulse or something to do that would bring them away from the right path, whether they know it or not? Because that's your responsibility, right? And that is also prayer, because that's the glorification of the Lord. And I think we're seeing, we can be too enamored as lay people, too enamored with the contemplative life, and not take up our responsibility to go into the fray of it all and expose people to God's love, which is exactly what the mission of the laity is.
In that end of that chapter, you have practical tips.
Yeah.
And here you suggest, among others, be aware, slow down, praise always. So my question is, did this come mostly from John Paul II, or this in your development of your prayer life? Still to this day, he's my spiritual hero, and in a sense my spiritual father. He's of many of us. I mean, how many of you have seen him and have heard him speak, and poof, like it would just blow your mind, right? Yes. And you feel like the Holy Spirit is working through this man, and you feel inspired, right? And you didn't have to work as close as I did with him to feel this. I've met people who were at a youth day or something, and they were one person in a million people, and they had on TV even.
Or see him on TV, and they have this. This is a so I don't get me wrong. I'm not claiming that I'm a JP2 guy, and of course most of the foundation is what I got inspired. But as the Apostle Paul says, there is not a JP2. We're not of JP2 or Benedict or Francis. We're of Jesus Christ, right? So never don't misunderstand what I'm saying, okay? Mm-hmm. But yes, he inspired me with this. He would the slow down and the reflect. I'll give you a couple of his habits. One thing he would do for hours is lay prostrate in front of the Eucharist. He had a little chapel, and he would go in there and physically lay down in front of the Eucharist. However you're able to do, try to do that once and see what happens to you. And you don't need to be Thérèse of Lisieux, who knows exactly who goes into a higher state, but just say, here I am, Lord. Here, this is me offering myself to you. Take me, I'm giving myself to you. It's a very simple, slow down thing. The next thing he did is this, and that's what I do what I try to do as a business, or I try to do as a business leader now. I try to do with my work. Is he had a little desk in his chapel, and he had one of these yellow pads with the red lines or the blue lines, and he would, when he started a project, like he started to write an encyclical, or he started to write something, and the trip where he wants to go or something, he would start in the chapel in front of the Eucharist, not adoration, but in front of the Eucharist,
yes,
in the tabernacle, sit down at his little desk, take out his pad and says, Lord, I'm starting this. Now would be a good time to inspire me. And then start to write. And this filial trusting is what we need to let go of some of the formality to deal with the Lord and say, look, I'm here and I mean it. And if you really want to inspire me, now is a good time. And then you will be surprised in how much the Lord starts to interfere. I can tell you, this book was started like this because I tried to get away from it, from writing this. And when you start to do this, all kinds of things start to happen in your life that you start to notice. On the one hand, it's this proactivity with the Lord. The other thing that he
Here.
now it's not on anymore. Let me see.
Here.
Yeah, it's sort
Yeah,
of
use
doing
this
a little
one, use
bit of.
this one just in case.
The other thing he did, he every year, it's just, I mean, look, I could talk for hours on this. Every year, on his birthday, he would continue to write his spiritual testament, and which was eventually, that's what Cardinal Civic received, and in which he also said what needs to happen with stuff, and he would reflect on it. And the good part of that was published in one of the books that Cardinal Civic wrote. And in it, he would reflect on his death, on his life, and say, what is left to do for me between now and my death? So he celebrated his birthday every year by meditating and writing on his death, which you think is morbid, but it's actually not. Because God gives us a certain amount of time on earth, and we better get to it. And sometimes we're so much in the fray of things that we forget what matters, and we walk away and get involved in Sisyphus work instead of actually doing the mission that we have. And then the final thing he did is to do a daily reflection on, it's like what St. Ignatius prescribes, on doing a reflection of the examination of conscience, and then of gratitude in your life.
Sorry. So in chapter 4, you talk about know how to choose what's right, exercising your free will, and you mentioned St. Ignatius. I had attended to talk about spiritual warfare, and in one of your, in that chapter, in chapter 4, you said, all bad actions start out as thoughts, but later you state, for every negative thought that enters your head, there is a countervailing positive thought. Can you share a little bit about this interior battle of the mind and how you utilize this understanding, not only as a Swiss Guard, but even now?
Yeah. So, I teach at the Bush School of Business at CUA. It's my friends over here. So I do a class on this, an entire class on this for business people. And I teach business, and they're saying, why are you talking about thoughts and about virtue and about God and everything? The reason why I'm doing that is because business is an external manifestation of your thoughts. Business ideas, it's even the ideas of how to organize an organization are an external manifestation of thoughts. And that thought is, am I using an employee, or am I enabling an employee, or I'm working with an employee, or do they work for me? These are all thoughts. Thoughts have consequences. There is a beautiful book I want you to look at. It's called Thoughts Matter. It's by a sister called Mary Margaret Funk, like funky, Funk. It'll change your life. It's the story of what Saint Cassian wrote down 300 years after Christ. He went into the desert, because apparently, most likely, John the Baptist's followers went into the desert and started these groups, and then eventually you have Antony of Egypt, and I forget her name. There was a male and a female order, and these were people, ascetics, who were who renounced possessions and went into the desert. Well, and Cassian was sent to go figure this out, and he comes back. It took him 30 years, to figure this out, and he comes back and he says, guys, what they've taught me out there is that humans only can have 8 kind of thoughts, and they taught me how to deal with those thoughts. Now, don't you feel a little cheated that you've lived until today that you didn't know this? When I read this book, I say, hello, I wasn't very good in school. Maybe they did this at a day that I didn't pay attention. But I'd like to know this. I tell you what he says. You're not responsible for your thoughts. I can control your thoughts from the outside. Your thoughts are actually not yours. Your thoughts are everybody's thoughts. Thoughts are the same thing as leaves blowing by you in the fall when you're sitting on a bench. Everybody has the same thoughts. I can cause them in you from the outside, and I can prove to you. I do it with my students. I can prove that I can control your thoughts, which means right away that they're not yours. They're caused. And they're caused by the same thing to the same people. So then what are you? Who are you if you're not your thoughts? I can also cause emotion in you, which means you're not your emotions. This is one of the great lies that go around, that you are your emotions. You are what you think. It's not true. And we know this since 2,000 years and longer. What happens is when you have a thought, you have it, and it's you, and then the you decides, evaluates the thoughts and decides if it's a good thought or not a good thought. Do I want this or not? It has to do with love. Do I love this idea or do I not love this idea? Don't let it dictate it to you. You decide, do I like this or not? If I like it, I can either modify it or just take it in and then turn it into action. There's a lot broken in our society today where we think we're our thoughts and something comes in and we're not discerning anymore. This is what discernment is. We're not discerning anymore and just act on it and we do stupid things, right? The same with the emotions. What we need to do is to start to control this, and there are some thoughts that are very powerful. Some emotions and therefore desires are very powerful. And one of the things they're talking about in there is, okay, if I say elephant, everybody thinks of an elephant, but I command you don't think of an elephant right now. No elephants, okay? Everybody thinks of elephants, right? This is one of the tricks, right?
Yeah.
So he goes back to the Desert Father and says, okay, how do I not think of the elephant? And here's what he said. Do you remember how they taught you the prayers that you know in your sleep? Hail Mary, full of grace. Glory be to the Father, and Lord Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner. He says your mind is a glass full of clear water. And a thought, especially any thought, is a drop of blue ink going into your mind. And there's no way to take the blue ink out by dropping more blue ink in, which is to think of more elephant. Not happening. How do you get the blue ink out of a clear glass of water? More clear water. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. These prayers are taught to you, and the reason, kids, while they're asking you to memorize these and say them until you can say them during the greatest temptation of your life. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Right? You can quickly say this, and it's clear water into your brain, and the thoughts go away. This is the spiritual warfare that John Paul talks about. I'm just afraid that we're not taking it for real, and we're not teaching our young ones how to fight the battle.
Could you explain a little bit how you employed some of these, this information when you were a Swiss Guard? Because you had to stand at attention for a long time.
So they teach you this you can kind of, in this, one of the feelings, one of the emotions, feelings are also emotions, and desires you have, that's one of the beautiful things that God gave us. You know, I often ask my students, what is free will? And you know what they say? Free will means nobody got to tell me anything. Right? No, that's not free will. So what? Is free will me banging my head on this and you're not allowed to tell me not to do it? That's not free will, that's stupid. Free will is this. When you go to the gym, or now it's Friday, we just had a Lenten Friday, and you crave a donut, or you crave a beer, or you crave the meat or whatever, and what do you say to yourself? You know your body wants it, your palate, I love a beer. What am I telling myself? No, not having it. I'm fighting against my own nature, my own instinct, and I say no because I'm in charge.
Hail Mary,
that is free will. Hail Mary, full of grace. That is free will. I have a will that can rise above nature, above my basic desires, and say no. That's what the church is trying to teach us in fasting, in almsgiving. I want all the money, don't you? She teaches us to actually say no to our base instincts and base desires so we become the master of our life. The way we are with God, the way we are like God, is because we have free will. God is a being who wills. And when God said, let me make man in my own image, God doesn't look anything like us. We are like all the animals. When God made us, how did he make us? The same clay that he made the animals made us, because I'm dust to dust, right? So what's different when God made us? John Paul would dwell on this. How was it? What's the different step he took after making the animals and then making us? Because he started, oh, let me make somebody in my image and likeness. And he goes and takes clay and forms a human being. That's like he did the animals. So what did he do on top of it? He breathed his spirit into him. The spirit of freedom. The spirit of saying, I can rise above this nature and say no even to my strongest instinct, like I'm hungry. Right? And look, I teach 18-year-olds, and I'm telling you, I'm not leaving anything out in telling them how to resist basic desires and be the master, because that is the core of what John Paul has taught us. That's the theology of the body, and that is so powerful, and we're too timid to talk about it. The lowest desires humans have is food, sex, and things. These things are good things if used appropriately, but they need to be controlled by ourself and need to be true in the way we use them. And once we get the right perspective and have a plan around it, then everything becomes easier. But what we do as young people is keep being surprised by these things, and then it's like a wave suddenly crashing your door, and then the door breaks because it's a surprise. But if you know what's coming, then you can plan for that, and that's spiritual fortitude.
And practicing the little things.
And practice starting with the little things, yeah.
So I like every chapter is just full of words to live by. So I wanted to now move to chapter 8. This is about living a balanced life, all things in moderation. And again, you begin the chapter with the quote from Pope St. John Paul II. All men and women are entrusted with the task of crafting their own life. In a certain sense, they are to make of it a work of art, a masterpiece. And that's a beautiful sentiment. And you talk about balance. Can you speak about how we can live out and be a masterpiece?
Yeah. The art of humanity is to live, is to have enough control over your life to live the virtue of moderation. Shelley's writing about this in her next book. Not too much, not too little. Or not too little, not too much. It's actually out of Cassian's, these 8 thoughts. The 8 thoughts, just so you see how important this is, Pope Gregory ended up melting 2 of the thoughts, and what Cassian said, the 8 thoughts we can have, and these are theories of thoughts about food, and he says, and then there's 2 extremes to this. There's too much food, gluttony, and too little food, like anorexia or some kind of thing. But then there's the middle of it, which is what? Moderation. Eat when you eat and fast when you fast. There's no problem. Look, we're Catholic. There's no problem having a party, but just fast when you fast and feast when you feast. Not too much, not too little. Be in the presence, right? Pope Gregory shrunk this down to 7, and guess what came out of that? The 7 heavenly virtues and the 7 deadly sins. They're directly from the desert over there. And this is exactly the 7, there are 7 there because that's what we can think as humans. And so the chief virtue of this is the way of the middle, to hit the middle. Later on, Cassian ended up coming back to Europe and went to France and started the first monastery in Europe. Later on, St. Benedict with Monte Cassino and all that, started his rule, which is a very, among Augustine and so on, one of the great rules for monastic life. And he uses the way of the middle, ora et labora, right? We do both and everything
And
in moderation. I find in my own life it's a very difficult thing. Different people have different inclinations on this. What I'm struggling with is I'd rather fast than only have one beer. So when we're here, I'll have 2 beers with you, but it's really hard for me to only have one. That is exactly what God is trying to teach you with moderation. And so what is it for you? Like, look at these 8 thoughts and start to just say, where is God calling me to practice the moderation? And the moderation, the beautiful thing about moderation is because it praises God's creation for what it is, good. All these things, food, sex, things, and then as you go up, I'm not going there because it gets more complicated and I don't have a whiteboard with me. But these 3 things are part of what God created. And what did God say every evening of creation? It is good.
Yes.
All these things are good, but we have to use them in moderation, in a godly way. And that's something we struggle with throughout all of our life. And it's not something we're going to get right, but it's the path to this and the desire of this moderation that eventually, I think, after we die, leads us into the arms of God.
Thank you. And also in this chapter, you talk about keeping a personal log of God's small wonders.
Yeah.
Small messages that he gives you every day, like a gratitude log. You review it daily and rejoice as you give thanks.
Yeah. People don't believe in miracles anymore, and little things that God tells you. Just coming here today, there's so many affirmations and gifts that God gives me. So a friend of mine, Ken, showed up, texted me this afternoon and made sure I'm on time, didn't you? I didn't ask him, but I was working and I was away, and he texted me and says, "What time is your talk?" And I said, "Actually, I don't know." And I don't know what prompted you, Ken, to say something, but then I'm like, okay, I gotta hurry up here, because he made me aware that the talk is much earlier than I told you, didn't it? And I walk in here, and where's the young gentleman with the Swiss jersey on? Where is he? And the first person I meet here coming into this place is a kid with a Swiss national team shirt on with one of my favorite players. Yes, you can say, "Oh, that's a coincidence." John Paul always said there is no such thing as a coincidence. God is a God of history. There's nothing, not one of the hair on your head are not counted. Look, we can walk around like Puddleglum, in C.S. Lewis. We can look around gloomy and everything. Guys, look at where we are. Look at what's happening. Look at how we're all sitting here and that we have this opportunity and everything. And if we can start to act out of this joy, then we are Christians, right? And the other side, that we can embrace the cross in a sense, which we also all have,
right.
With that joy, that God doesn't let anything. I heard this great idea of, somebody told me this, that they read this in Chesterton, I think, and just many of you here have a strong cross. I just need to quickly check on that, because I don't want to oversimplify. Yes, some of you have a really big cross. Maybe you're ill. Maybe you made a decision that wasn't a good decision, or maybe there's economic hardship, and now this thing goes around where people lose their jobs and things like that. Maybe some things are really bad, okay? Maybe you're afraid of the next decision. You're supposed to make a decision, you don't know what. God, you're making music with God. And every tone you're making, even if you make the wrong tone in the song, like imagine God playing the most beautiful Mozart and you're going bang, 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 you know what I mean? Like totally out of tune. God will immediately recompose the entire theme of the music to integrate your clanking so that it sounds right. Can you follow that? I think it's C.K. Chesterton who writes about this. We need to we need to work with that joy in our heart. Because too often we get depressed and downtrodden because we think everything has this finality to it. I need to make this, and oh boy, like I'm standing there in that room of saying, I'm a total idiot, everything I do is wrong, I screwed up this, and I have bad grades, and do this and this, and everything I do is with a aura of finality. That's not true. Our God is a God of infinity. And if I make a mistake, and if you make a mistake, God loves you to the point that He will recompose the entire sheet to make your clanking part of a symphony.
I think I've heard also God writes straight with crooked lines, so it's
Exactly,
similar.
yeah.
But I thought your story about when you were called as a businessman to go to Afghanistan,
Yeah.
that might sort of tie in nicely.
So sometimes I wonder myself, why am I doing this? So I'm a business guy, and I teach at a business school and everything, and I've helped start these software companies, and these were large companies. I was very blessed. Yeah, I was very blessed with a career in high tech. I was involved in the beginnings of the internet in the early 90s with FTP software. I was part of the company that invented speech recognition, Siri and all the speech stuff like this. And so I'm like out there doing this, but nobody ever knew my faith and my connection with John Paul II, and I sort of didn't live it out until everything came crashing down. It's a long story, I write about it in the book. But what happened is I started to recognize what is wrong with this approach that I had, with the thinking I have about business or work, and I started to change that, but I still did not want to come quite out as extreme as I am today. Look, I consider this a business talk, right? And I'm witnessing to you about my relationship with Jesus Christ, right? I consider this a business talk. I never meant to go that far. Why am I here today? Because I tried to write about this in a secular way and sort of just here's the business strategy and everything. I even led a business strategy company for a while. And that business strategy company, it was a very famous Harvard Business School kind of company and everything with venture capital in it. And one of our key customers was Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan. And we had offices all over the world and do this business strategy in difficult environments. And things happened, and I had never been to Afghanistan, and this guy Karzai says, oh, the president of the company, the CEO, is never showing up here. Why would I re-up with the customer, with my client, with my supplier, if I've never seen the boss, Yeah. And I have a board, of course, and they're like, well, Widmer, what are you doing? Like, get your butt over there. And I'm like, hey, I can't, I did other things. And so finally, I get to go. And it was a Saturday, and I'm like, this is the last thing. We had some issues at home and things like that, and it's the last thing I wanted to do. And finally, I get away, and I have a flight through London, through Abu Dhabi, and then into Afghanistan, Kabul. The last one was a secure mission, like with the U.S. military. You had to get in, and because it was 2004, and it was on a Saturday, April 2nd, I never forget. And I fly through to London that day, and I arrive at 8 o'clock in the evening, London time, and I get out of the plane, and I see all over the CNN screens that they announced that I didn't pay attention, and I'm like, what? And there was the cardinal there, and who said, John Paul has gone to the house of the Father, he died. I'm like, what? My spiritual hero, my spiritual father just died, and I touched down on European soil the hour that he dies. Like, I'm thick, but I'm not stupid, okay? I can see this, that I'm supposed to be here. So I canceled my trip, and I went to Rome instead.
Yeah.
And within 24 hours, he wasn't that morning, the next morning, first thing, I'm in front of his remains. Like, we have this privilege as Swiss guards that you always are a Swiss guard. And I have access. And I was in front of his body while they were still getting him ready. And I broke down and cried and said, why me, and this and that. And it's one of the few times that I almost audibly heard the Lord say, you're welcome. That's how God talks to me. And I'm like, yeah, thank you. I met the man of the century, and it dawned on me who I met here, who this is, which before it didn't. And then the Lord gave me this feeling of, so what are you going to do about it? Like, okay, you say I gave you this big gift, what are you going to do? And I said, Lord, nobody will ever meet me again without knowing about my conversion and about JP2, and I'm going to be the Jesus guy, and that's what I'm going to do from now on in business, right? And I had my peace, and I stayed, and I was there at the funeral. 1 million miracles happened to me that week. Literally, believe me, 1 million miracles. And I go back home, and the company, is this going to go public? No. Then I skip it. I lost my job because I went to this, because I wanted to go back into Afghanistan, and they wouldn't let me back in because it was a security thing, right? And I had to go all the way back. I had to go to my board and say, hey, sorry guys, I went to the Pope's funeral instead, right? And so I ended up without a job that summer, and and I'm like starting, and I joined the venture capital company and started to work on new ideas and of course, all the things I promised were far away from me, and I had a friend who says, listen, you need to calm down and come on a retreat with me. And I'm like, yeah, as soon as I figure out what to do next, because I have a family to feed and a job, you know how this is. I'm like, I gotta hustle. I would go and do this thing, and he's like, no more choice for you. And actually, the guy lives here in Virginia now, or this is Maryland still. Jan is his name, Jan Kramers. And he said, no more choice. You come with me on this retreat. I'm choosing the time. And he says, I'm coming to pick you up. And I said, no, it's fine. I'll find my way there. And he made me promise I would show up. Long story, I did show up. I walk in to the chapel, and there was a little table there, and the priest was giving a reflection. And I'm, of course, late. And I walk in against my will, and I kneel down, and the priest up there says, and today, on the first anniversary of John Paul's death, I'm like, oh, I guess I'm here for a reason. And I'm with the I'm in front of the Eucharist and say, I'm sorry, Lord, I forgot. He's like, Andreas, we haven't seen each other in a while. Are there any outstanding promises or something? And I'm like, Lord, now. And that's the night I started to write this book. Right there in the chapel, in front of the Lord, to do the outline of saying, what is it that I need to say? And I promised the Lord that nobody would ever meet me again without knowing all the things that you're knowing about me now, because I think this is a very important message for our day and time.
Well, I thank God for that. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Bravo to that.
We have just a little bit of time. I wanted to ask, you were just awarded in 2024 by Pope Francis the Pontifical Equestrian Order of St. Sylvester, Pope and Martyr. I wanted to know how this came about and how you were made a knight.
It's amazing. So this doesn't mean anything to people outside of the Vatican, but the Vatican has its own pecking order, and they have nobility, right? Because the Vatican has a sovereign king. The Pope is a sovereign king, and there's no democracy in a sense in the Vatican other than electing the Pope. And there's a whole hierarchy, and there are in a sense nobles like knights and things like that, which half the Vatican is the Swiss Guards. Like there's 135 of us, and then there's everybody else, and there's other lay people who live there, but from the times where the Pope had a whole country, the papal states in Italy, they were of course dukes and this and that and king and sirs and all that. And the Pope maintained all that, even though he only has the Vatican today. And so occasionally then he gives one of these titles to somebody. And for example, in the Swiss Guards, he gives the title to an officer, and I was no officer. I was no officer in the Swiss Guards. I was just cannon fodder. I'm a basic soldier in the Swiss Guards, which I am to this day. Meaning I am a part of the Guards. I keep serving. I represent them over here, but I am a foot soldier, like a halbardier we call it. But I've been helping them for the last 30 years, and that's the expectation, that you continue to help. Yeah? Okay. The oath keeps. I go back once a week per year to go help and so on. And when you're an officer and you serve for like 20 years, the Pope will actually elevate your status and give you a knighthood or something like that.
Very nice.
And Shelley and I were asked to go to visit the Swiss Guards. The commander tells you what to do, and then you basically do it. And he was the guy who was with me, who served with me, Christoph Graf, a wonderful man. And he's the commander of the Swiss Guards now, although he started basically with me. And he called us to say, come for our anniversary day of the anniversary of the Swiss Guards. And they were all standing there and it was a huge celebration and everything, and the whole military, like all of in the uniform. And then he calls out my name and says that today the Pope has decided to make you Cavaliere, a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, which is one of the two main orders that the Pope gives to make people a knight. And you know, I want to play it down and say and try to be modest about it, but I'm telling you that if this is my tribe, okay, and if they're giving me this, it means the world to me.
Yes.
That they would give me something like this, even though I have no credentials for this, I have no background for this, and I'm a simple soldier.
It also comes from serving the church.
I'm a simple soldier, and then the Pope makes me this is, I was very touched. It's beautiful.
Well, when you have a knight, you also have a lady.
And Shelley is my lady.
Michelle.
We met in Rome, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask, could you tell us how you met? And if you...
So Michelle and I met when she studied in Rome at Loyola University. She did one of these exchange programs to go, or not exchange, study abroad, like CUA has it. We have a campus in Rome. Well, Loyola has a campus in Rome. She grew up in Chicago, and she went there, and then it ended up being that 10 of the girls from the Loyola campus and 10 Swiss Guards were set up to go and have fondue together, so that this would be a safe environment. And that's how I met her on February 5th, 1987.
That's
and
points.
It was at this time that I had this very strong conversion and very strong foundation in the Rosary, and I can recommend young people. I was a young man, so I'll recommend it for young men to make the basis of your life that prayer of the meditation of Christ through the Rosary. And I was so focused on this. I did this several times a day because, again, all I did is stand around, according to the Pope's secretary. But it's true. You can pray the Rosary anywhere. You can play soccer and pray the Rosary. It works, right? And so that when God speaks to you and introduces you to your wife, to your soulmate, even though you can't speak her language, you still know that this is her. And so I did not speak English. I spoke in song titles, English. You know, I couldn't speak it. I never learned English. And
did you speak Italian?
Some Italian.
Or German?
And
Okay.
she studied French in school. And so we spoke French and Italian together. And and we fell in love head over heel, and then I finished my service, and then I also introduced her to John Paul, and he said, "That's a nice girl." And I thought, well, who else would you ask?
Exactly.
Right, and so we got married in 1990. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Over fondue. No, it's actually over spaghetti. We had spaghetti and meatballs. It's a beautiful story. We really started with nothing. We came with lots of love and friends, and we got married. You know, our dinner was in the parish center like this, and one of the priests cooked. Father Tom, he cooked spaghetti and meatballs for us.
Awesome. Well, I want to say thank you so much for being here, both of you. They're going to be here to sign books, but I want to, before that, I will see if anybody has any questions. Okay, hold on here.
When you were speaking to Pope John Paul II, what language did you speak? Or what language did he greet you in that first time?
So he starts with Italian. Everybody, the kind of language in the Vatican is Italian, but at the time I didn't speak Italian. I spoke French and Swiss German and German. And so he started off speaking Italian, and when he saw that I was puzzled, he switched to German, perfect German. And the whole interaction that I had with him in the beginning was all in High German. And then once I stayed for longer, when you go into the Guards, you immediately go into an intensive Italian course, and so within a couple of months you speak Italian. And from then on, even when he met her, when I said goodbye, I had the audience. We went for Shelley's 30th birthday. We went to visit him, and he congratulated her. It was on her birthday, an audience, and we also introduced her parents to her and so on. And my parents were there. Then he would always speak Italian.
And there's a question in the back, Christina?
Take it really close. Like you have to almost put it on your lips, otherwise they can't hear.
Thank you so much. I really feel like JP2 is my Pope. He became Pope right when I was born, and he passed away right when I finished grad school, so I feel like that's my entire life. And my grandparents were born in 1916 Poland, raised there, survived the Holocaust, and every room in our house growing up had a picture of JP2.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful.
This is a question my grandmother would want to ask.
Yeah.
Can you tell me the most Polish thing about Lola? Can you tell me something that really stuck out about him being Polish, which was so special to us?
Yeah.
It just meant the world to us.
Look.
The Polish Pope.
Here's my honest answer to you, and since you're Polish, you have to judge my judgment, because I don't know anything about Poland other than meeting that man. And the two things I find are the most Polish is one, the intellectual life. That man showed me, the way he attracted me into the faith is to show me the depth of thought somebody can have. It's almost like because remember, I stood there every day hearing what he has to say. So it's not that he lectured to me, but I was just always in the room, right? And then you just listen, you hear what he says. It's almost like he takes you by the hand and brings you up on a mountain and says, watch this. And then you see a horizon of thought that just blows your mind. I always felt like, well, where was I when that was taught? Because he gives you these new visions, like Cassian and all these new visions of things and this beautiful vastness of the intellectual life. I think that's Polish, because there is a humility but excellence in the intellectual life. A very Polish way. The second thing is food. These guys can food and song, right? We could attract him with food and song to our barracks anytime. All you have to do is say, "Oh, we're gonna have a barbecue here, and we're gonna have the kielbasa and this and that, and then we're gonna all sing and everything." Bam, he'll be right there. And so he would. And another thing he did, I got to know Polish food without knowing the names, because he would receive so much food, and on the one hand, we would of course check that. The Poles would just give him food. I don't know, they like to give each other food. And we would of course check the food, but then it all ends up upstairs where he lives. And when you go up and tell him about the plan for next day, like who comes for the mass and everything, he would literally like be in the kitchen, and he had the sisters he lived with who would cook, and he would like go and look in the pot what is cooking and say what's for dinner and this and that. And then this kid comes in and says, "Oh, Holy Father, okay, here's the list for who's coming to mass tomorrow morning." And then he'd say, "Okay, good." And then, "Sister, what didn't we just get? Somebody made this cake or this food or gave us this beer from Poland or something. Don't let him go back with nothing. Bring something down to the boys." And so then you would walk down with stuff in your arms, and he would give us the food he receives. And so I became an expert at this food, except never knowing what it's called. But I've had any specialty of Poland that you can imagine, courtesy of John Paul II.
Well, we have just one more question, because it's almost time to get ready to go for the Stations of the Cross. Go ahead.
Yes. These are your feelings towards Pope John Paul, right? These are your feelings towards Pope John Paul. What are your feelings towards Pope Francis, and what is the difference between the two popes?
So that's very important. I thank you for this question. I started off by saying, look, we are Christians, we're Catholics. Our man is Jesus, not the Pope. The Pope is just the current head of the church in terms of the ground personnel. And the Pope is something that if we start to question these things, then things very, very quickly become not Catholic anymore. Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, Pope John Paul II, Pope John Paul I. I tell you, I know the Vatican really well, and it is a cornerstone of my belief that the Holy Spirit leads this church, and you can count on it. And I know there's popes even who said other things, but I'm telling you, you can count on it that the Spirit does not allow the church to make mistakes like that. And so what we're going through, John Paul was so strong, and he had it's like when you have a very strong pastor, and then the new pastor comes and says, well, but the old pastor did this and that. That has nothing to do with anything. This is the new pastor. And that doesn't make this not the pastor. And they have different kinds of priorities. And I think John Paul II was a pope who started to help us find our way in a way. Philosophically, I think he's the answer. It gets a little complicated, but the confusion of the Enlightenment started with René Girard. It started with, Descartes. René Descartes. I think, therefore I am, to disassociate ourselves from our body, which had many very bad consequences over the next 200 years, until John Paul shows up. And this whole idea about the theology of the body is to say, no, this body is who I am, and our soul and our body is the same, and we will be resurrected, body and soul, and to give the Christian answer, definitive answer to Descartes, to bring us back to reality. Pope Benedict after him, and I knew him as a cardinal very well because he was, there all the time. Pope Benedict, if you haven't, please read his trilogy on Jesus Christ of Nazareth, where he brings you close to Christ, of who Christ is as a man, as a person, as your brother, as your Savior. And you need to read this book because that was his pontificate. He did his encyclicals were God is love and charity and things like that. He's the one who said, God is love, Jesus is here, and he's your Savior. Pope Francis is coming and saying, take this love and project it outside of the church. Have compassion with people. Don't create an economy that kills. Don't hate each other. Love the person at the fringe, and you're doing pretty well. Like the measure of everybody taken care of is if you love the person at the fringe well, everybody in between is going to be taken care of. And I think that's something to understand, not one papacy versus the other. Look at the whole history that the Holy Spirit is telling us through these last 50, 60 years.
That was a great question. And we're going to have to end now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.